Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at a 1 and 2 player game by Uwe Rosenberg called Fairy Trails from Paper Plane Games. In this game you are playing as either an elf or a gnome in a magical forest, and you're trying to create paths from your home. So, very simple game. We'll take a quick look at the table. There's not a whole lot to show you, and I'll kind of give you an idea of how the solo game plays. Then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so here you see the complete components for Fairy Trails, and this is not even specific to the solo game. This is everything that's inside of the box. And honestly, this is going to be very short. There's not a whole lot to cover here. It's a very basic rule set. As far as anything that's changed or added or removed with the components for the solo game, the only real difference is that you're going to have access to both colors of tokens, the kind of purple and the yellow there, and instead of having a hand of cards, you're not going to. All you're going to do is have this full deck of cards. And you'll see that the back of this one card is different than the backs of all the others. This is your starting card. And so just like in the regular game, you're going to flip this over. Now, as far as what changes gameplay-wise, you have this starting card here. And then you've got this shuffled deck of every other card. And what you're going to do is one at a time, flip over the top card of the deck, and what you're doing is trying to close off these yellow and purple paths that are connected to these houses. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of rules to the game. That's really what you're trying to do. And in the solo game, the main difference, the big kind of hook, is that to win the game, you have to get rid of all of these tokens, which you'll see how it's done in a moment. You have to get rid of all of these tokens and before this deck runs out, basically. And then any number of cards that are left over in the deck, if you've done that, would be quote-unquote your score. Now, there's no score matrix or anything to compare that to, but a basic win condition is get all of these tokens out. And so how are you going to do that? One at a time, you'll flip over a card. Now, let me show you kind of how these work. You've got the two paths. I don't know if you'd call that a pink or a purple. I'm horrible with colors. To me, it looks a little more purple, so we'll go purple. You've got two houses there. This is connected to this pink path. This yellow is connected to this yellow path. There's also, you know, close-offs of the other paths as well. So this is the starting card or tile. That goes right there. Now, I've drawn this card. Okay? Now, this is a particularly difficult card because there's no way I'm going to be able to close off a path right here. So let's say, for example, I were to put this right here, because if I put this here, then if I get a yellow house and no other connections, I can close off that path and place a token. So I'll just do that. Now, in the solo game, the main difference is that if you ever put out 3 cards consecutively without being able to place a token, you lose the game. There is an easy variant that says that once per game, you can discard a card you've chosen and use the next card. But that's it. So I've already spent 1 card without being able to put out a token. So I've got 2 more potentially. I get this one here. Let's see. I could do, see, I'm still kind of stuck, but I could do this. Let's say I did this. Now, this house is on a closed path. Can't go any further that way. Can't go any further that way. Now I'm able to put out that token. Now that 3 card turn resets. And that's what you're doing. You're continuing one at a time to flip over cards. This is a particularly nasty one. See all those connections there with no close-offs? That really is tough because now now this path, instead of having 1, has 3 that you have to close off. So maybe I'd do something like that. It still has 3. So that was 1 card. Now I've got this. Let's say I went and did something like this. Now I could close off that one. Okay? And so that's what you're doing. You're continuing to place cards, hopefully try to get those tokens on the houses, and make it through without running out of this deck. That's it. So why don't we head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts for the solo game of Fairy Trails. Okay, hopefully that gives you a good idea of how the game is played in the solo variant for Fairy Trails. Not a whole lot to it. This is a game that you could learn in seconds. Honestly, there's really not a whole lot as far as the actual rules go. So let's talk about the solo experience. I usually tend to focus on some key areas. One is a win condition. Is there a clear win-loss condition, or is it a beat your high score? Well, Fairy Trails is kind of an interesting mix in that there is a clear win-loss. If you can place out all of your tokens before the deck runs out, you've won. And there's a bit of a score there in that the more cards you have left over, if you are able to successfully get all those tokens out, the better you've done. And I guess you could track that, I suppose. There's no actual scoring matrix that are saying 10 plus cards, you're a master of the forest, or whatever the case may be. A lot of times they'll do something like that. So does this work for me? Well, sure. I mean, it's really a puzzle game. You're just trying to get those little tokens out. You basically either do it or you don't. I mean, I guess you can try to keep track of how many cards you have and try to consistently get better so that you have more and more cards left in your stack by the end of the win condition. I don't know that that's something that I would ever do. When I play the game, I pretty much am just trying to get all of those tokens out. And sure, I might flip through the cards and see how many are left. So that's fine. It doesn't bother me. It's not a huge positive, and it's not, pardon me, a huge negative. Setup and teardown. Now, there's nothing to it. You take out the deck of cards, you put the starting card out, pour out the tokens, and you're good to go. I mean, this is, if a lot of times I'll see people ask, what's a quick setup solo game that can be played in 20 minutes? Well, this would fit that bill. I mean, it takes zero time to set up, maybe as short of a setup as I can even imagine for a solo game. So that's a positive. If you're looking to grab something off the shelf quickly that you can play and just get through in a short amount of time, this would fit the bill. Now, a lot of times for those type of games, people like to do those like when they're traveling or like on a plane or something. This wouldn't work for that because for such a small game, it does take up a surprising amount of table space because, you know, your map, your forest map can get pretty wide and far spread. So it's not a great travel game in that sense. It's fine if you're going to a cabin or whatever the case may be. As long as you've got a table with some decent space, you're good there. Rules are another thing that I tend to focus on, and the solo rules are as simple as the regular rules. I mean, there's nothing to it. There was no ambiguity that I can think of when it came to the rules. I read them in about 20 seconds and felt like, okay, I know what this is about. Let me get to it. So, overall, what do I think of Fairy Trails as a solo game? Well, this is a tricky one. This really is a tricky one because it is so very light. It almost floats away. It's so light. It's an interesting puzzle. I do find myself enjoying the process of laying those out. There have been some small strategies that I have kind of find emerge through consistent gameplay, but I don't know that there's a huge amount of replay value to this. Now, it's a small game. It's probably going to have a relatively small price tag associated with it. And so, look, if you're as a solo player, now I'm saying this specifically as a solo game because I think it would have a lot more replay value as a two-player game. But as a solo game, if you're happy getting maybe 10, 15 plays out of it, then perhaps it would work for you. I don't know that you're going to get a lot more than that because there's really not a lot of strategies beyond a few basic ones that I've found from playing it. Each game is going to play out relatively similar to the games before. And so it's a nice little puzzle for 10, 12 games maybe. But beyond that, I don't see this as being one of those games where you're just going to want to keep grabbing it off the shelf and keep playing it because you find a different experience every time. This really is a very basic puzzle game experience that is not going to have a lot of variability from one game to the next. So, I like the art. I like the quick setup and teardown. The rules are a breeze. It fills a nice little niche. But I can't give it a strong recommendation as a purely solo game because I just don't think it has the legs. For that reason, I'm going to give Fairy Trails a 6 out of 10. Not a bad game by any means, and if you're just looking to have it in your collection as a two-player game and have it as a solo game every once in a while, I think it's really good for that. But as a purely solo game, I think that the appeal will run out quickly. So there you have it. Thank you so much for your time as always, and have a great day.